What happens when a man who has stared down outlaws, criminals, and death itself for 7 decades on screen comes face to face with a talk show host who thinks a political difference of opinion allows her to speak to a Hollywood legend with complete disrespect? Prepare to witness one of the most unforgettable confrontations to ever take place on daytime television, as 94-year-old Clint Eastwood, the man that symbolized America's grit and defiance, showed everyone in the studio that he still did not suffer fools gladly. The entire room fell silent, and every breath seemed to be held in anticipation, as Joy Behar learned what it was like to face a man who had seen worse from many than she could deliver with her questions. So, what was so special that caused the Hollywood icon to lose it? Stick around to find out, because the tension in that room was ready to explode. It started off the morning in a flurry of electric and rather nervous excitement at the View studios. Everyone from the producers to the camera operators knew that this wasn't going to be an ordinary celebrity interview. At 94, Clint Eastwood was one of the most revered people to have come out of Hollywood. From a TV actor to a global film icon, to a critically acclaimed director and 4-time Oscar winner, he commanded respect throughout all demographics. However, backstage a storm was brewing. Sources confirmed that Joy Behar had been circling this date on her calendar for weeks, ever since they booked the star, and there was a reason behind her anticipation. She hadn't let go of the memories of Clint's 2012 Republican National Convention speech, the empty chair moment that made political history. For Joy, his conservative views were a direct insult to the liberal ethos she attributed to Hollywood, and today she felt was her day to try and take him down with his own outdated ideas on live television. Did she really know who she was stepping into, or had she been setting herself up for an ambush all along? As the studio lights blazed to life, Clint walked across the floor to his seat at the famed talk show table. He moved with a slow, precise rhythm, a carefulness of motion that a man who has lived many years will cultivate. The studio erupted into a thunderous standing ovation that shook the walls, and Clint simply gave a knowing nod, the same steely squint always visible in the eyes of Hollywood's toughest hero. Whoopi Goldberg led the charge, her words of introduction ringing with authentic adoration for a true legend, whose career had spanned over 7 decades and garnered 4 Academy Awards. "Please welcome the one and only Clint Eastwood," she exclaimed, and as the camera cut to a beaming Joy Behar sitting across from a still stoic Eastwood, it was abundantly clear that admiration wasn't high on the list for her. The sweet talk was over, and the confrontation the world wouldn't stop talking about was mere seconds from breaking loose. What went down next completely changed the tone of the show. Eventually, the applause died down, as Clint settled back, looking totally comfortable being the center of attention for millions. "Thank you, honored to be here," he said. He was a little more soft-spoken than he was in Dirty Harry, but his voice still held that characteristic, gravelly tone, one that suggested every word was weighed with extreme care before it was spoken. When Sarah Haynes asked him about his new film, Clint answered with the same surgically precise directness that characterized his legendary directing career. He was asked about the craft of it, the cast, and the internal burning need. He had to be behind the camera when most of his contemporaries were in their late 60s or early 70s. "I like to work," he said. His tone was as crisp and clear as ever. "I always have. The minute you stop working, you start dying. I've seen it happen to many of my friends, so I keep at it." The audience listened. This was the Eastwood that everyone had come to see. A man who said more in a single sentence than most could put in a chapter. However, beneath the surface, a storm was building. Did Joy Behar really think she could get a rise out of a man who had faced down a Colt 45 for half a century? The pleasantries disappeared the moment Joy leaned forward. Her voice acquired its distinctive sharp edges and a 10-degree drop in studio temperature. "Well, Clint," she began, with a glare that couldn't be missed, "you've had such a remarkable career, but I've got to ask you. Nobody seems to forget that particular moment in your career. The 2012 Republican Convention speech. The chair with nobody in it. You talking to Barack Obama's invisible self. Looking back on that, do you cringe? Don't you think it was your most embarrassing moment of all time? It was a calculated thrust designed to put the legend in a corner. The studio shifted, and the atmosphere became intensely uncomfortable. So how do you think the average Eastwood would handle an interrogation?" Clint didn't flinch or even bat an eye. He just looked directly at Joy, with those steely eyes that have made the most ruthless movie villains pause and question their every action. "No," he said in a low voice. "I don't." Joy appeared genuinely taken aback by the brevity of the response. "But surely you could see how the whole thing came across. A legend, having a conversation with furniture. Some critics and audience members claimed you'd lost it. They called you a senile old man. They said you were just pathetic to watch." Clint didn't lean back, nor did he become defensiveness. He simply continued to stare at her with a look that was at once terrifying and composed. "People will say whatever they're going to say," he said, in a voice as steady as a rock. "Doesn't make them correct. It was about pointing out that we have a president who makes empty promises. Not everybody understood that, and a lot of people just weren't going to understand that. I wasn't doing that to win approval from people who were never going to approve anyway." The response was so cool, so steady, that for the first time anyone could recall, Joy Behar was rendered speechless. The man with no name had delivered a masterclass in standing his ground. However, the argument was by no means over. The greatest spark was still to ignite. She was expecting him to be defensive, maybe to snap in a hot moment. She was, however, wrong, receiving instead the unfazed cool that once turned Clint Eastwood into a movie legend. "But don't you think it tarnished your legacy?" Joy said with an urgent tone. "You're a movie legend, and you used your platform for political partisanship. Respect for you fell with many people that night." Clint's response was a wry, chilled smile. No warmth to be found in it, just amusement at her effort. "Joy, I've been in this business 70 years, he said matter-of-factly. "I've been called a great many things. Critics have tried to write me off a dozen times, but here I am. Are you saying I lose sleep at night over what you and so many others thought of a speech I gave 12 years ago?" He leaned back in his seat, appearing completely unbothered. "I fought in Korea for the army. I've made over 60 films. I've directed Academy Award-winning films and have kept countless crews employed for decades. That is my legacy. I did not affect that legacy with a speech, however much many may wish I did." Joy's face tightened. She knew she was losing her audience but was not about to throw in the towel. Did Joy really expect the legendary Eastwood squint not to turn on her? And did she really anticipate how he would respond? Because his response in turn made the whole studio quiet. "But that's just the problem, Clint," Joy said, as frustration seeped into her tone. "You've aligned yourself with many of Hollywood's repugnant policies. Doesn't that mean you've been unfaithful to this industry?" The studio floor was crackling with electricity, and Clint's eyes narrowed, and a harder cutting tone began to fill the studio floor. "Unfaithful to this industry? I've been making films since 1955. I've given jobs and opportunities to hundreds of actors and kept entire film crews employed for years. I've made billions of dollars and provided that for this industry." He then paused for dramatic effect, locking eyes with Joy in an unwavering stare that forced her to shift uncomfortably in her seat. "I have never given this industry my free thoughts. I think for myself, and I always have. If that offends the people in Hollywood, that's fine with me and not my problem." The crowd, carefully selected by the show, erupted into a flurry of applause, landing so perfectly on point that Joy's face took on a deep red hue. "That is not fair, Clint," Joy snapped. "There is a distinct line between free speech and hate speech, the line between fact and opinion." "And where is that line drawn?" Clint said quietly, yet the remark seemed to cut through the room like a razor. "By whom? You? People like you that already agree? It seems that definition changes every time someone opens their mouth." Joy seemed utterly flustered at this point, and clearly, her plan to corner the living legend had begun to collapse in real time. To regain control, she pivoted her attack to his body of work. "Fine, fine. Clint, let's discuss your films," Joy began, her voice heavy with disapproval. "Critics accused your films of condoning violence and toxic masculinity and called Dirty Harry fascism and a propaganda film. How do you account for that?" The crowd went silent, and Joy had finally gone for the jugular, targeting the films, which had made Clint Eastwood a household name. As the cameras zoomed in on Clint, it was clear that he was only getting started. How can a man who basically invented the American hero respond to being called a propagandist? The showdown was underway. "Don't you bear any responsibility for the culture of violence in this country?" Clint stared at her for a long, uncomfortable moment before replying. Dirty Harry was about a detective who had to stop a serial killer, but bureaucracy kept getting in the way. That was back in 1971. You're sitting here trying to hold me responsible for what's going on in America because of a movie I made over 50 years ago? He shook his head slowly. Disbelief was written all over his face. I've also made films that are about the immense cost of violence. Unforgiven was about a man who was haunted by every man he'd killed. $1 Million Baby was about the tragedy of a shattered dream. Letters from Iwo Jima showed the war through the enemy's perspective, so they were reminded that they too were human beings. But none of those you'll touch on because they don't suit the story you have written for me. The attack was like a surgical scalpel, Joy having cherry-picked her most violent roles and deliberately ignored the masterpieces he'd created to show his range. The question then became, was Joy actually trying to find out the answer, or simply wanting to instigate a fight? I'm merely pointing out that there is a perspective in your films, she replied with some defiance. There is a certain perspective that some people find problematic. Problematic? He repeated the word, the sound of it like grit in his mouth. That's a word modern people use to mean whatever the person speaking it wants it to mean. Is there a perspective in my films? Yes, mine. I am the director, so obviously there is. Do you want movies that are filled with your perspective? Go out and make them yourself. Laughter rippled through the room at his reply, Joy's embarrassment impossible to ignore now. He was not finished, however. Leaning forward, his voice dropping to that well-known whisper of pure steel, he continued, "What I find interesting, Joy, is that you've been asking me about my politics, my movies, and my opinions. But you haven't once asked me about the craft of filmmaking, or about what 70 years in this business has taught me, or why at 94 years old I still continue to do this. You aren't interested in that. You simply want me to say, I'm sorry for not seeing the world through your eyes." The simple truth of his statement stripped away the pretense of the interview. It was nothing more than an interrogation of his ideology. Joy tried to regain some of her lost ground, but her voice lacked its former edge. I am asking the questions that our viewers want answered. Are you? Eastwood raised an eyebrow, his gaze dripping with skepticism. Or are you asking the questions you want answered? I have done many interviews in my time, Joy. Most people want to know about the movie itself. You seem more interested in something other than that. In that moment, the legend that is Clint Eastwood did not just win the debate, but he took the entire stage apart with his words. Even at 94, he was still the toughest man in the room, and nobody would back him down. What do you think? Did Clint take the pressure like a professional, or did Joy have a valid point? Let us know your opinion in the comments section below, and be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any more Legend Showdowns. Joy scrambled to recover, grabbing for the only word she had left in her arsenal: accountability. Eyeing Clint, she put forth, "Do you think maybe you have some responsibility with your immense clout to help and not harm?" Clint, with his practiced calm, hit back immediately. "I make films that entertain people. Sometimes they make them think. That's how I help. I provide jobs for people and I treat them fairly. That's how I help. I fought for my country when I was young and have paid my taxes on time ever since. That's how I help." Leaning forward, Clint dwarfed the table and everyone around it, his immense stature suddenly overwhelming the space as his voice boomed through the theater. "The one thing I don't do is I don't go around telling people how to think, how to vote, or how to live their lives. It's not my job. It's not anybody's job, however morally superior they might perceive themselves to be." The air in the room turned thin with anticipation, as Clint wasn't just defending himself but challenging the very core of the cult of modern celebrity. But would Joy Behar falter? It seemed unlikely. "But Clint," she pleaded, her voice cracking with obvious exasperation, "the party you support has advocated and promoted policies that have hurt women, minorities, and the environment. How can you associate yourself with that?" There was a long pause as Clint appeared to be contemplating. With a sudden, soft calm that resonated through the room, he stated, "I have worked with more women and minorities throughout my career than probably any other producer in Hollywood, and I've given many opportunities to actors and directors who, in some cases, would not otherwise have had one. I judge people on their character, not on the color of their skin or on what is between their legs. That's the way I was raised, and that's how I've been my whole life." Not content with his explanation, he continued with a slight grin. "I do use an electric car and have solar panels on my home, but I do not go around telling other people how they should live their lives because it is my personal opinion that they are adults and should make their own choices." Apparently, this is a controversial stance now. The audience erupted in laughter as Joy stood stiffly with a look of sheer disbelief, but Clint, still serene, followed it up. "You can make jokes about it, Clint, but there are many people suffering because of the policies your party supports." This was the line for Clint Eastwood as his famous, legendary hard stare took over, the same one that has frozen countless Hollywood villains to the spot. "My party? Joy, I'm a libertarian. I believe in individual freedom, limiting the power of the state and free enterprise. I believe people should be free to make their own choices, without political pundits or television personalities interfering. If that makes me a monster, so be it." Straightening his impossibly straight spine, the 94-year-old movie legend continued with a quiet strength. "But speaking of suffering, which you brought up, I grew up during the Great Depression and my parents dragged us all over California looking for work, not knowing where the next meal was coming from. I know what starvation is. I know what it's like to be hungry." There was a hushed silence throughout the studio audience as he spoke of his life before fame. There was a strength in his words that no political spin doctor or soundbite ever could capture. He had taken this battle from a battle of political ideology to one of humanity. But there was still one more card he was holding close to his chest, and it was one that would surely leave Joy Behar with nowhere to turn. Are you ready for the man who has seen it all? You won't want to miss the end of this historic face-off. Everything I've ever got has come to me because I worked for it, worked hard, and long hours. For a good number of decades, no one helped me, but I used what I created to help people, build things for people. So that is my belief. Work hard, be fair to everybody, and leave folks alone to mind their business. It is not that difficult." His plain, uncomplicated words were like a thunderclap within the sterile studio environment. But Joy wasn't ready to retreat. Not yet. She leaned in closer, as if preparing one final strike, her tone heavy with suspicion and self-righteousness. "But Clint, don't you think that bootstraps mentality completely ignores systemic inequalities? People don't all have the same opportunities as you do." Clint fixed his gaze on Joy, his eyes unwavering for a long moment of heavy silence. "I was a poor boy from Oakland whose father worked digging swimming pools. What advantages do you think I had then? I made my own advantages. And that's how it is with any individual when they want something sufficiently enough." He sighed, the deep sigh rumbling his chest, frustration seeping through the controlled stoicism on his face. "You know what I believe is the problem with what we have here, Joy? Some people believe that being at odds is the same as hatred, that having a different viewpoint somehow automatically makes one a morally bankrupt human being. That is not the way a free nation operates, nor the way adults behave with one another." A palpable chill settled over the room, his statement not only refuting Joy but dismantling the entirety of the show's atmosphere. But he had more to say. After all, he had lived through 94 years of American history and now felt it was time for him to teach a masterclass in what that citizenship actually means. "I have been on this planet for nearly 94 years now, and I have witnessed tremendous change in this nation. Some for good, and some for bad. But the most profound, most destructive change I've encountered is the thought process that allows us to think we cannot honor someone we fundamentally disagree with. That is a very dangerous thought process, and one that tears the heart out of the nation." The silence within the space was thick and profound, his words resonating with the wisdom and gravity of a man who had witnessed kingdoms crumble in real and fictional realms alike. His gaze now returned to Joy, his voice soft but unwavering. "Today, you came at me with such anger. You questioned my political stances, my artistic endeavors, and my very persona. That is, and always will be, your right. It's the freedom we all hold. What I want to say to you, and by extension to everyone watching this program at home, is this." He turned his head slightly, his eyes iconic in their steely clarity now locking onto the camera lens and, in doing so, meeting millions of viewers eye to eye. "I do not hate you for not agreeing with me. I do not think you are an evil or immoral person because you view this nation's current events from a different perspective than my own. I simply think you are incorrect on certain points. just as I believe you feel I am incorrect on many others. And that is precisely what it means to be free. It means we can respectfully be in disagreement and still retain a mutual respect for one another. His shoulders finally relaxed, the tension melting away. I have directed nearly 40 films. Several have carried an ideological bent toward the conservative, some decidedly liberal, and others are simple stories that observe human beings trying to navigate their often tumultuous existence. I have never made a picture simply to push a specific political agenda. My work is driven by a desire to entertain audiences and, hopefully, evoke emotion. That is all that an artist can truly strive for. In that moment, the legendary Hollywood icon didn't just deflect a verbal assault, he transcended it. He exited the set, the same quiet dignity with which he had entered it, leaving the world in contemplation. In a universe filled with incessant noise, are we finally ready to absorb the wisdom of a man who truly values the power of silence? Slowly, deliberately, and without any trace of haste, Clint stood. I came out here to talk about my new film, about 70 years in the business, he announced to the quiet room, his voice carrying. Instead, they wanted to interrogate my politics, as though I were on trial for thought crimes. Fine. I've been in front of a lot worse audiences. With that signature squint, for a second, the audience didn't see an old man at all, but rather the hero who stared down outlaws on dusty roads and dared punks to make his day. He looked directly into Joy's eyes one last time. The reason I'm still standing, still working, and still making news is because I never cared what any of you people thought of me. I worked. I believed in the audience. I believe in myself. That is my only advice to anyone. Do the work, be yourself, and let the chips fall where they may. With a subtle nod to Whoopi, he said, "Thank you for having me." Then, with the easy grace of someone who already knows he has won, Clint Eastwood strode off the stage. The audience was in shock, a stunned studio, a host who looked as though she had just experienced a brutal lesson about picking fights with legends. The crowd rose, the sound erupting like a sonic boom that rattled the building, each person on their feet roaring their approval of a man who wouldn't be cowed. Joy Behar sat there looking half the size she was before, like someone who had taken a knife to a gunfight and didn't realize it until after all the shots had been fired. This was meant to be a very public denunciation of the Hollywood legend, but it had turned into something of a masterclass on poise under pressure. He'd come onto The View as an icon and walked off the set, reminding everyone exactly how he got the title. No anger, no retribution. Just the unshakable authority of someone who knows exactly who he is and needs no one's permission to remain himself. That moment reverberated for weeks, as the clips of Clint's impossibly calm, cutting answers collected millions of views and sparked a national conversation about civility, political discourse, and when tough questions morph into ideological assaults. Clint didn't just win this argument. He proved that there is nothing stronger than a quiet, confident man in a world that has become obsessed with loud, hollow outrage. Even at 94, he showed the world something we seldom get to see. An actual, bona fide adult, behaving like an actual, bona fide adult. So, what do you make of this historic moment? Do you think Joy Behar was simply doing her job, or did she completely go too far when dealing with this Hollywood titan? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I can't wait to hear your views. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more mind-blowing stories that are guaranteed to leave you absolutely stunned.